Hey guys, welcome to the second Schaeffer video, the end of the God Who Is There book overview. And so I think there's some really exciting stuff in this part of the book, and I also just want to give a quick recap of where we've been. So Schaeffer was talking about how the Western civilization has fallen below the line of despair, and this has happened because people are no longer confident that they're able to build a unity of a worldview out of starting from mankind alone. Starting from the basis of mankind, people cannot build that worldview of unity and hope and meaning. And so this is called the line of despair. That's what Schaeffer calls it. And different aspects of culture have slowly crept below the line of despair. It started with philosophy, and then it hit art, then it reached music and general culture, and then we're starting with the fifth step in this video, and that fifth step is theology. Theology has fallen below the line of despair. There's a lot of modern theology that takes its cue from Kierkegaard and gone off the rails from biblical Christianity. It's started to believe in that leap of faith. And modern liberal theologians have accepted the presuppositions of what Schaeffer calls the uniformity of causes in a closed system, as opposed to the uniformity of causes in an open system, which is the Christian position, because God interacts with the universe. And so these liberal theologians are trying to find who the historical Jesus is on the basis of these assumptions, these naturalistic assumptions. But the supernatural elements of Scripture can't be separated from the person of Jesus, right? Because they're so intertwined in Scripture, the historical Jesus and the supernatural stuff. And so at this point, the liberal theologian makes Kierkegaard's leap. And so that looks like this diagram here. On the top, the top level, you have the non-rational and the non-logical, which is a crisis first-order experience. Faith as an optimistic leap without verification or communicable content. And below that, you have the rational and the logical, which tells you that the Scripture is full of mistakes, which ultimately leads to pessimism. So this is modern liberal theology below the line of despair. They start from themselves, from mankind, just like the non-believer does, and using those assumptions, they reach the conclusion that the Scripture is full of mistakes, just like any other book of historical value. It could very well be wrong. In fact, they would say it most certainly is, because it has all this supernatural stuff, because they believe in a uniformity of causes in a closed system. And so in order to get to God, you have to make that leap of faith, because the Bible can't tell you how to get to God. The Bible is ultimately unreliable. And so this is the result of religious existentialism, making this leap because your presuppositions force you to naturalism. And nobody can live consistently with this kind of despair that their presuppositions force them into. And this has led to what Schaeffer calls a form of modern mysticism. That is to say, it leads to a meaninglessness in your language when it comes to spirituality and meaning. You can say the word God, but it is really a contentless word, because there's nothing there to tell you what exactly God means. Remember, the Bible isn't inspired. It's unreliable. It's only the thoughts of men. And so this is a God of your own making. And it leads to an empty spirituality, and therefore to the same emptiness as secularism. And so Schaeffer illustrates that like this. So on the top, you have contentless faith. There's no rationality. Rationality can't reach into that upper story. And then on the bottom, you have rationality, which can't give you meaning. It can only tell you about what is in the universe, and only that to a limited extent. So there is no way to access anything above the line. And that's what liberal theology leads you to. And another aspect of this mysticism is it tends toward pantheism. People who start to think this way, regardless of what discipline they're in, tend to start talking about the universe as if it's divine. You kind of hear this on TV shows and stuff. Like, I think the universe is trying to tell me something. That sometimes I hear that when I watch movies or TV shows. But people below the line of despair will sometimes hope that the universe speaks through their art or their music or their literature. And there's a search for a transcendent meaning that their own worldview can't give them. So they make this leap, and the leap is to the universe to provide meaning. And this reminds me of Romans 1:24 through 25, which says, "Therefore God gave them up in the lusts of their hearts to impurity, to the dishonoring of their bodies among themselves, because they exchanged the glory of God the truth about God for a lie, and worshipped and served the creature rather than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Amen." And so this type of thinking makes anyone who believes in any area of culture that we've discussed a walking contradiction. As Schaeffer says, man becomes divided within himself. And so Schaeffer recounts a story where he was talking with a physicist who was confident in this one particular theory that would solve Einstein's problem of electromagnetism and gravity. And so Schaeffer says this: "He became very enthusiastic about this because I knew enough about the subject to stimulate him, and he was far away in his thought. Then I brought him back by saying, 'This is fine for the Christian who really knows who he is, to say that the material universe may finally be reduced to energy particles moving in opposite directions in a vortex. But what about your naturalistic colleagues? What happens to them when they go home to their wives and families at night?' He paused for a moment and then said, 'Oh, Dr. Schaeffer, they just have to live in a dichotomy. The very mannishness of man refuses to live in the logic of the position to which his humanism and rationalism have brought him. To say that I am only a machine is one thing. To live consistently as if this were true is quite another.'" And on this note, he also mentions a composer named John Cage. And this is one of my favorite examples that he gives in the book. John Cage was a composer, and he believed in the total chance nature of the universe, and he would try to compose his music in this way. Sometimes he would compose it in response to flipping a coin, seeing if it came up heads or tails. But he decided that this wasn't random enough, so he developed a machine that would help him compose music completely at random. He also would have two conductors conducting at the same time, but unable to see each other, to try to get a sense of randomness in there. But Cage himself admitted that he was not able to live this way. He was one of the best amateur mycologists in the country, which was someone who would gather mushrooms and study mushrooms. But he himself admitted that if he approached mycology in the way that he approached music, he would be dead real fast. You can't do mycology that way. And Schaeffer says it like this. He says, "In other words, here's a man who's trying to teach the world what the universe intrinsically is and what the real philosophy of life is, and yet he cannot even apply it to picking mushrooms." And that says it all to me. But then Schaeffer talks about where modern theology goes from there. And the logical conclusion is that God is dead from this point of view. There is no longer meaning in either the upper or the lower story. And he illustrates that like this. On the top, you've got non-rational, non-logical faith. There are no categories for God. All knowledge concerning God is dead. The personal God is dead. There are no faith categories for man or his meaning. And on the bottom, you have all rationality, i.e. all contacts with the cosmos, science, all contacts with history, mean that God is dead and man is a machine. So there's nothing starting from yourself that can tell you that there is that God is there and that man is anything more than a machine. But if you make this leap, you're making this leap into an utter abyss, into mysticism. There's no content there because there is no revelation from God to give it any meaning. It's your own idea. And think of it like this. Okay, if you're going to base your liberal theology at least partly on a historically reliable book, but one that is not inspired, why would you choose the Bible? Why not Homer's Iliad or Odyssey or Livy or Thucydides? Like, you could choose literally anything because the Bible is in the same category as all these other books. And so there's no point to it. There's no content to it. And so ultimately, secular man and the modern theologian end up in the same place with a God who is dead and a mankind who doesn't matter. But as Schaeffer saw it in his day, this modern theology had the opportunity to take over the culture. It had a few advantages. It could use the classic Christian words of God and Jesus and Christ, but with new meanings, or more accurately, with no real meaning at all. So it could connect with people who still had a superficially Christian background. Second, many liberals had already started to control large denominations in the U.S. And we see today how that played out, as almost all mainline Protestant denominations are completely non-biblical now. Third, people were already being conditioned to accept these contentless connotation words. Schaeffer says, quote, "So there is open to the new theology the possibility of supplying society with an endless series of religiously motivated, arbitrary absolutes. It is against such manipulated semantic mysticism that we do well to prepare ourselves, our children, and our spiritual children." End quote. And I think we've seen this come to fruition in our society. For example, people talk about like gay Christianity. But in this sense, Christianity is just a connotation word. If they were talking about real Bible-believing Christianity, they couldn't have that adjective in front of it. It's kind of like saying thieving Christianity or murdering Christianity or blasphemous Christianity. Not that all of those sins are equal to one another necessarily in terms of their impact on society or individuals, but the point is that they're all contradictory to the Christian faith. And so by jettisoning the historic Christian faith, you can put whatever modifier in front of the word Christianity that you want to put. On the other hand, I think this new theology has backfired because instead of drawing people into these types of churches, people are instead looking at it and saying, okay, well, you're just like the rest of the world. If I can just keep doing what I'm doing, living how I'm living, why would I want to add going somewhere on a Sunday morning to that? What would be the point of that? And so I think it sort of backfired. Then Schaeffer describes the difference between historic Bible-believing Christianity and this new Christianity. The first big difference is the reality of individual personality. The Bible is the basis for the origin of personality, right? You have the mannishness of man. You have the image of God. In the beginning, there was a personal being who made us. And so the alternative to that position is that personality either arises out of something that is non-personal, or personality is simply an illusion and it's not really there at all. Only some form of mystical jump will allow us to accept that personality comes from non-personality. And Schaeffer says this about new theologians, quote, "Because these men will not accept the only explanation which can fit the facts of their own experience, they have become metaphysical magicians." I love that phrase, metaphysical magicians, because they're taking reality and they're trying to turn it into something that it cannot be because their worldview tells them that it has to be this way. Second, Christianity provides a basis for verifiable facts and the possibility of knowledge. And that basis is God's revelation through Scripture. So Scripture is not just a theological textbook, right? It takes place in history, in real situations. And so it touches upon history. It touches upon elements of science, elements of historical accuracy. And so therefore the Bible provides an adequate basis, an adequate unity of knowledge, because all these things are connected. The spiritual is connected to the physical, which is connected to the historical and the scientific and the natural order of the world. And so the Bible beautifully links the upper story and the lower story, and it doesn't have to be a leap of faith. It is all integrated based on God's revelation. Another thing is that God communicates himself to us propositionally. He communicates through propositions, through history, into our world. He participates in the natural order. And so God does not communicate himself to us exhaustively, but he does communicate to us. He does communicate himself to us truthfully. Okay, now there's a distinction there. If he communicated himself to us exhaustively, that means he's not God, because he can completely communicate himself to finite beings. But he does communicate to us truthfully. The problem with the new theology is that it is totally unverifiable and unfalsifiable because it has no relation to how God has revealed himself. The Bible is just a historical book with mistakes in it to them. And so it can't tell us anything about God, and it can't breach that upper story. And it has no basis for thinking of even language as meaningful. And I love this point that Schaeffer brings up. The Bible provides the basis for meaningful language. God communicates to us through syntax, grammar, morphology, pronunciation, lexical categories. And so he's validating that language can mean something. And the alternative to this is that our language is totally subjective, which is a view that some people take. Because we bring our own meaning to the word to certain words, people say that we can never truly communicate because we're always basing it only on what is in our own mind. But Schaeffer has a story to illustrate the silliness of this sort of complete subjectivism of language. And so he was talking with a student at St. Andrews in Scotland, and this guy was very hard to communicate with. And so the students wanted Schaeffer to come talk to him. And so this is what he says, quote, "Other students had said they found him difficult to talk to, that what he said did not seem to make sense, and they were at a loss to know where to start. I had a half an hour to spend with him. After only 2 minutes of talking in his room, he said, 'Sir, I don't think we are communicating.' I started again. About 2 minutes later, he repeated himself. I began to think that the half hour would be spent in a nonsense session. I looked down and noticed that he had very thoughtfully prepared a lovely tea. There it all was, pot of tea, cups, and so on. So I said rather gruffly to him, 'Give me some tea.' He was taken aback, but he passed me a full cup of tea. Then I said, 'Sir, I think we are communicating.' From then on, we had a very effective conversation." End quote. So what this demonstrates was that his theory of communication, which came from his worldview without God, doesn't actually comport with how language really works. We do all bring our own conception of words to the table, but not to such an extent that communication is impossible. That's not how language is acquired when we are children. We are not just pouring in our own meaning and no other meaning into it. The acquisition of language is really fascinating, and we don't totally understand it because the brain is so complex. But the basis for knowing that we can all communicate on the same level is that since we are made in God's image, all of our brains and all of our minds work similarly. But on a worldview without God, how would we know that? How would we know that all of our brains and all of our minds work in a similar enough way that we could communicate with language effectively, that we could communicate abstract concepts? But because we are all made in the image of God, we have this common ground, we have this point of contact, as Cornelius Van Til would call it. And so God has validated the possibility of linguistic communication through Scripture because it is itself language, and that is really cool. And so the conclusion of a godless worldview is that language is totally subjective, but that does not comport with God's universe. We all know that we can communicate through language. And this means that concepts like love have genuine meaning. Outside of the concept of the biblical God, the meaning love can be radically subjective. But because we have a Trinitarian God, we have a God whose love is a very part of who He is. And because we are made in His image, we have the ability to experience this love. And so we are able to love God and love others. And Schaeffer has another cool illustration that looks like this. So you have the line of anthropology. You could replace this with the line of despair in a Christian worldview, in a sense. So above that, you've got God. God is the only uncreated thing. So He is in a category by Himself. And the Trinity loves each other, right? And that is how love is a part of who God is, because He has been loving Himself. The persons of the Trinity have been loving each other since before time began. And He's able to communicate that love to us. Those are the up and downward arrows. And that means that we are able to love God back and that we are able to love others effectively. And so the third difference is how each side deals with man's dilemma of brokenness. The Christian answer is that man hasn't always been this way. Man has put himself in a moral dilemma by deliberately disobeying God. First of all, through our federal head, Adam, and then each of us individually, we disobey God. The new theology's answer is that man is in a metaphysical dilemma. This is what reality is in and of itself. This is not abnormal. The world that we see it to them is as it's always been. Man is broken by nature, and there is no answer to the problem. And I think this might be a reason why some people struggle with the reason for God allowing evil. They see our brokenness as metaphysical rather than moral. They see it as normal rather than abnormal. So they struggle with the existence of evil, even though evil is a problem that we as humans have caused ourselves. Schaeffer brings up a book written by Albert Camus called The Plague. And in this book, you're supposed to be torn between the idea of joining the doctor and fighting the plague, but thereby pitting yourself against God, Or you can not fight the plague and thus be okay with people dying, and you're on the side of God in that case. But the Christian answer takes you out of this dilemma. This is not a dilemma for the Christian. On a personal level, true Christianity provides justification on the basis of the blood of Jesus, but the new theology can provide no justification because sin and guilt are a metaphysical problem and not a moral one. And this leads to the conclusion of relativism. Everybody goes ultimately to the same place, regardless of what they have or have not done, or what they have or have not believed. And ultimately, the biblical answer shows us 4 important facts. First of all, the God who is there is a good God. Number 2, there is a hope for man's dilemma. Number 3, there is a sufficient basis for morals. And number 4, there is an adequate reason to fight wrong. The God who is there is a good God. There is a hope for man's dilemma. There is a sufficient basis for morals, and there is an adequate reason for fighting wrong. These facts should challenge the Christian to fight injustice, not to stand on the sideline. Schaeffer says, quote, the Christian is the real radical of our generation, for he stands against the monolithic modern concept of truth as relative. But too often, instead of being the radical, standing against the shifting sands of relativism, he subsides into merely maintaining the status quo. If it is true that evil is evil, that God hates it to the point of the cross, and that there is a moral law fixed in what God is in himself, the Christians should be the first into the field against what is wrong, including man's inhumanity to man. End quote. So that's challenging to me, that we should be on the front lines fighting against things like abortion and sex trafficking and all these horrible things that are happening in our world. We should probably be more willing to get our hands dirty than we currently are. Okay, so all this sounds well and good, but how do we know that these solutions proposed by Scripture are actually true? Well, Schaeffer gives what I think is a really cool analogy. Imagine a book which has been mutilated, leaving just 1 inch of printed matter on each page. Can you tell that I ganked this picture off of Google? Although it would obviously be impossible to piece together and understand the book's story, yet few people would imagine that what was left had come together by chance. However, if the torn-off parts of each page were found in the attic and were added in the right places, then the story could be read and would make sense. The whole man would be relieved that the mystery of the book had been solved, and the whole man would be involved in the reading of the completed story. But man's reason would have been the first to tell him that the portions which were discovered were the proper solution to the problem of the ripped book. And so these ripped pages represent the universe as we now see it, which is abnormal. And then the discovered portions of the book represent God's revelation through Scripture, which tells us not only about spiritual truth, but also truth about the universe in which we live. And so essentially, the Scripture's diagnosis of our situation is telling us is that it is the missing piece of the book. God's revelation is the missing piece of the book. It fits in so well with what we know about the universe, what we know about mankind, that we conclude that it is what completes this hypothetical book. So if man starts from himself, all he has is ripped pages, and he can't make heads or tails of the universe. But with God's revelation, you have a complete book that makes sense. And so Schaeffer says that we do use our reason to come to this conclusion, but we use our reason to realize that we have to start with God's revelation to make heads or tails of the universe. Now, unfortunately, many people reject God's revelation, try to make up their own story to fill in the missing pages. And you can do that, but it won't make sense of the universe we have. So does this constitute something that we could call proof of the Christian worldview? Well, Schaeffer gives his definition of proof. He says that first, your theory must be non-contradictory and must give an answer to the phenomenon in question. In this case, human existence, reality itself. So the system, as a system, has to work as a whole. It has to be self-consistent. Second, we must be able to live consistently with the theory. So it's not just enough that your theory is consistent in theory, hypothetically, but you have to be able to actually live out what your theory says is true. And so, for example, a person can say that morality doesn't really exist since there's no God, but that same person is still going to be horrified when they see a mass shooting on the news. Obviously, most people don't see that the Christian solution is the only solution fitting these criteria. But why don't they agree with it? Well, Schaeffer says, quote, I suggest that a serious question has to be faced as to whether the reason why modern men reject the Christian answer, or why they often do not even consider it, is because they have already accepted with an implicit faith the presupposition of the uniformity of natural causes in a closed system. This does not mean that the Christian answer should be accepted for pragmatic reasons, only because it works, but it does mean that the solution given in the Bible answers the problem of the universe and man, and nothing else does. It should be added in conclusion that the Christian, after he becomes a Christian, has years of experimental evidence to add to all the above reasons. But we may stop at the same place as Paul does in Romans chapter 1, by saying that the existence of the external universe in its form and the mannishness of man demonstrate the truth of the historic Christian position. He goes on in Romans, he does not in Romans 1 go on to appeal to the Christian's experience. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men, who hold down the truth in unrighteousness, because that which may be known of God is manifest in them, the mannishness of man. For God manifested it unto them. For the invisible things of him, since the creation of the world, are clearly seen, being perceived through the things that are made, the external world in its form, even his everlasting power and divinity, that they may be without excuse. There's one more thing here that I don't want us to overlook, which Schaeffer brings up. He says that we should not only this should not only help us defend our faith better or share the gospel better, but this should also bring us into a higher level of worship. Seeing how God is the only thing that can make sense of facts and human experience should lead us to worship God even more. This isn't just a philosophical game or an interesting set of propositions, but this is something true about the God of the universe who is there. Now, the next thing that Schaeffer talks about is how do we talk about this in our current climate? A couple important principles that I want to pull out is that Schaeffer emphasizes that all of us are made in the image of God, and that provides a real possibility of communication with them. That is, as Van Til would put it, the point of contact. That's where we can meet every human being and point out that they are made in the image of God, and we can demonstrate that in various ways. Second is to remember that everybody has their set of presuppositions upon which they are basing their thinking and from which they are deriving their conclusions. And so, as we've said, they'll never be able to consistently live it out, right? Every single person is living in this tension between their foundational presuppositions and the universe as it really is. They have to live in God's universe. And so, Schaeffer says, quote, the more logical a man who holds a non-Christian position is to his own presuppositions, the further he is from the real world. And the nearer he is to the real world, the more illogical he is to his presuppositions. And so you can think of it as a continuum that looks like this. You have on one side the real world, the external world of man himself, and on the other side, the logical conclusion of somebody's non-Christian presuppositions. And so where that person is along the line shows if they're acting more logically according to their presuppositions or if they're acting more how the world really is. And wherever they are, that is their point of tension. And so everybody, whether they're a university professor or somebody sleeping on the banks of the San Diego River, is somewhere along this line. So our goal is to find each person's specific point of tension. We have to figure out where they're being inconsistent. We have to point that out. And as someone who is more of a Van Tillian, I would add some things to that. But nevertheless, I think Schaeffer is dead on. Point out the tension in their worldview where it doesn't comport with the world that we have. Another way Schaeffer puts it is to take the roof off. He calls it taking the roof off. You basically remove the protection they put around their worldview and let it basically rain on them, showing that their worldview doesn't work. And so here's an example of my own. So if someone is a naturalist and believes that everything is subject to the laws of physics and chemistry, yet they still believe that people are responsible for their actions, that is a point of tension. You can take the roof off by showing them that if everything is just the result of random natural laws, then nobody's really responsible for anything because they could not have done otherwise. This biological determinism is the one factor. They're not morally responsible. Remember, it's just a metaphysical reality that people are this way. There can be no morality to it. Okay, so next, what you want to do is move them toward the logical conclusion of their presuppositions after you've taken the roof off. So, if a person's brain is subject to the laws of physics and chemistry, for example, and they aren't responsible for anything they do, then how can you get angry when an injustice is done? How does that make sense? After all, they couldn't help but do otherwise. Why would you expect them to do anything different? And if there's no responsibility, there's no sense in punishing them. There's no sense in enacting justice. And it's a worldview in which you can't even have something called justice. So the natural outworking of their worldview shows this complete absurdity of itself. And if we do this right, it's going to make them uncomfortable. So we have to be careful how far we push a person. Some people need to be pushed only a little bit, only a nudge, and then they're ready to receive the gospel because they're ripe, as it were. Other people need to be pushed pretty far and before they see the absurdity of their worldview. Third, we need to make sure that we are sharing the gospel and not just doing apologetics. And we emphasize that it is true. It is absolutely true. Not a preference, but a real space-time reality. Just as real as if they were going to step into the street and get hit by a car. And this is crucial because so many college students, like we talked about in the last video, don't see it this way. They see it as a matter of preference. And so somebody who can't see it as something absolutely either true or false cannot receive the gospel as truth. They cannot come to Christ. So at this stage, though, people are likely to have genuine questions if they've seen the problem with their own worldview. And so they say, okay, so mine doesn't work. Well, what do you have that you're telling me is real? So we need to be willing to give them real answers to their questions, their genuine questions that they have about Christianity. Things like the reliability of Scripture, the relationship between science and faith, things like that. But we also shouldn't let them off the hook, and we can keep asking them questions, if necessary, to remind them of the alternative to our answers, which is to live in inconsistency. So the person we're talking to about morality can say, okay, well, if that's true, if people are responsible, how can God allow evil in the world? That's a question we need to be prepared to answer. But we can also respond with a question of our own in a kind way, something like on the basis of naturalism, where you derive the concepts of good and evil in the first place. And when they finally see the conclusion of their worldview and they accept it, that's likely going to lead to a sense of meaninglessness if they're still trying to hold on to that worldview. And Schaeffer acknowledges that some people, even after having the roof taken off, won't want to come to Christ, even though they know it's the only possible way. But have we really left them any worse off than before if they do fall into that despair? Not at all, because the person was spiritually dead either way. It would be worse to leave the person in a comfortable place where they don't recognize their spiritual deadness and need. What we've done is hopefully at least we've put a pebble in their shoe. We've gotten them thinking, given them something that's hopefully going to nag at them. And Schaeffer recognizes the difficulty of this. He says that there was once a girl that tried to commit suicide after he had taken the roof off of her worldview. But Schaeffer says, quote, "Even if she had succeeded, after walking in the mountains and crying before God, I would have begun the same way with the next person who came." End quote. And eventually this girl did come to faith. But I think his point is that if Christianity is true, then no other worldview is, and it would be unloving to leave them comfortably where they are, strapped into the car if the car is careening off the cliff. We need to be willing to help them realize the truth so that they have the opportunity to dive out of that car before it goes off the cliff. And so Schaeffer talks next about the importance of both defense and offense in apologetics. And we need to, first of all, defend the faith, right? We need to have solid answers that guard against attack, first of all, for our own sake, for intellectual honesty, and to build our own faith. Second of all, to build up the next generation of believers. We have to be able to demonstrate to those that we are discipling that the Christian worldview is robust, it is strong, it can stand against all comers, anybody who wants to attack it. That's never been more important than it is right now in history, and it'll probably continue to get even more important with the increased number of intellectual attacks that come against Christianity. But there is also an offensive component. Schaeffer says that apologetics isn't just about living in a castle and protecting from invaders. It's also about taking ground for the kingdom. So, Schaeffer says, quote, "The positive side of apologetics is the communication of the gospel to the present generation in terms that they can understand. The purpose of apologetics is not just to win an argument or a discussion, but that the people with whom we are in contact may become Christians and then live under the lordship of Christ in the whole spectrum of life," end quote. So apologetics is always about the gospel. The two activities known as evangelism and apologetics, they're really not separate. They're really part and parcel of the same thing, and I think that's really how we need to think about them. Because the more that we wed apologetics to our preaching of the gospel, I think the more effective that we're going to be in evangelism. And if we are doing apologetics without preaching the gospel, then we're just in an argument. That doesn't help anybody. Another thing to remember about offensive apologetics is that we're presenting positive reasons to believe in the gospel. We're not demanding a leap of faith, right? This is reasonable. Christianity has a history of being a robust, rigorously intellectual faith. And so true biblical faith is faith based on knowledge. The biblical definition is trust, not a blind leap into the dark. And so as we are communicating the gospel to people, we need to be sure that we are communicating the importance of truth, that truth really exists, and that it is found in God's revelation. And so the gospel is grounded in a historic space-time reality of Jesus' death on a cross. I think it's so important that the Bible puts so much emphasis on things that happen in history. Think about how much of the Bible is actually just history. It's amazing that God bridges that gap between that upper story and lower story that Schaeffer talks about. And so we need to remind them that this is founded on knowledge. It's a content-rich faith based on the God who is there, and that God is not silent, but has revealed himself to us. So for me, some of the key takeaways from this book, first of all, were to think presuppositionally. We need to be aware of how people are thinking, how people are reaching their conclusions, because those conclusions are based on what they already think to be true about the world. That's based on their starting point. So when we start to think presuppositionally, we'll be able to see why people reject the gospel and how we can better bridge that gap. And I think this is a learning process. It's not easy to, first of all, just jump in and do well. We need to practice. That means that we need to share our faith. Second is to realize that how people think is reflected in our culture. We saw how culture went through these different phases of going below the line of despair. People's ways of thinking is reflected in what a society values, how it operates, what it promotes, what it rejects. And so we're seeing some big shifts in our culture right now regarding that. And so it behooves us to understand what those shifts are and how people's ways of thinking are impacting that. Third, when talking to people, we want to find the point of tension. Remember that nobody can live fully consistent with what they said, with what they say they believe if they are not a Christian. Them living in God's universe prohibits them from being able to do that. And so we need to kindly point that out. But we have to make sure that we're doing it with gentleness and respect, and that we're not pushing too far. We don't want them to go off the cliff. We want them to see the cliff coming and know that they can jump out of the car. And finally, remember that apologetics and evangelism are not two separate things. They're part and parcel of the same thing. They're always wedded together. I think that's why 1 Peter 3:15 is so important, and it can be used as a proof text for both the need for evangelism and apologetics. I don't think that's accidental. I think God did that on purpose. So we need to have the same end for both apologetics and evangelism, to see people won to Christ. So that's the book. That's my overview of The God Who Is There by Francis Schaeffer. So I hope that was helpful to you. I want to do more books soon. I'm going to try to keep them coming. Have a good one.
Hey guys, thank you so much for watching this video. I hope it was helpful for you and for growing in your relationship with God. If you are a college student in between the ages of 18 and 26, we want to invite you to join us on campus for our weekly meeting. If you want to see more videos like this about how to grow in your relationship with God, go ahead and click this video icon up here and it'll take you to a link to another video. Also, I want to remind you not to forget to subscribe to the Challenge channel by clicking on the Challenge logo right down here. Thanks, guys.